one of the things in your article you start with, I think you call it, what are the best weeks to hunt? And it says the best week for elk hunting in 2025.
Yep.
Uh, and the first subtitle that you have is moon phases. So tell me what from the Elk 101 Corey Jacobsen perspective, do you normally break this topic down by moon phase?
I do. Yeah, there's two key things that I'm looking at. One is the fall equinox, and the other is the moon phase. And there's a lot of other factors that we'll dive into, but those are kind of my starting points to lay out. You've got your calendar. We've broke it down into weeks. So what we're talking about right here is week one, September 1st through the 8th, somewhere in there. So,
Yep.
there's a little bit of leeway on each side of that, but primarily what we're talking about is early season here. And we haven't
Yeah.
really got into pre-rut. Maybe at the tail end of this week, we'll start touching into pre-rut, but we're really still in the early season phase. So
Yeah.
moon phase and fall equinox play a part in elk behavior and elk activity. And then the fall equinox actually is what triggers the estrus cycle of the cows. So that's what really triggers the peak rut. So a little later on in September, we'll really get into how the fall equinox contributes to elk behavior. But moon phase is I think we all would agree, when there's a full moon, elk are able to be more active at night. And that
Yeah.
means they can be less active during the day, which is when they're more susceptible to predators, whether two-legged or four-legged. The
Mm.
more they can bed down during the day and stay in their sanctuary or their bedding areas, the more protected they are. And when they're on
Yeah.
the move or when they have to feed out in the open during daylight hours, they're just more exposed to danger. So a full moon will affect how an elk behaves. And
Okay.
when it comes to hunting elk, I think in mountain states like Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Colorado, elk are less affected. Their behavior is less affected by moon phase than in the desert states like New Mexico and Arizona, Nevada, southern Utah, some of those states. I've just, in my experience, I've hunted elk in 9 different states, and in seeing that, there is a difference in how they behave based on the moon, especially in those desert states. There's a switch that goes off at about 8:15 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and the elk bed down and they go quiet for the day.
Yeah.
And when you have a full moon, it happens a little bit earlier. And then in the
Yeah.
evening, sometimes you don't even start hearing bugles until 20, 30 minutes before dark. That's when they get
Right.
up and start getting active, just because they can take advantage of those nighttime hours for activity. So I start with moon phase. We lay out the calendar and then look at the moon phase for each of those weeks. And this year, it's not ideal in this upcoming first week of September.
No, we're coming into a full moon. Full moon is September 7th this year.
Yeah, so it lands right
So,
at the end of week one, which means the week leading up to the full moon, you're going to have quite a bit of moon. We're starting at over half moon, and by the time we finish week one, it'll be full moon, and so it's going to be a lot of nighttime light for elk activity.
hmm, you're not encouraging me because I
Well,
planned on going September 1st through the 10th
yeah, and
on
I'm
one of
going
my
September
hunts.
1st through the 8th on one of my hunts in the same state
All
as
right.
you. So,
All right. So,
fortunately, both of us are going to be hunting a mountain state during that week.
yeah, that's
So
true.
moon phase isn't quite as important, and we'll come back around to that and dig in a little bit more detail. But other
Yeah.
factors that we're going to face, during that first week, we've got the benefit of less hunting pressure preceding this
Mhm.
week. So most states are just now opening, meaning the woods haven't been filled with hunters for the last 4 weeks. So the elk are
Right.
going to be. We have a fresh pool of elk that haven't been harassed yet. So that's a benefit.
Yeah.
They haven't got into being chased into sanctuaries. They're still in their summer patterns. As far as the cows and the calves, the bulls, a little bit different. So I think it's important here to understand what the bulls have been doing the last 2 or 3 months. So during May, June, July, the bulls are in bachelor groups. So they're all together, they're hanging out. There may be two bulls, there may be 26 bulls, but they're grouped up and it's just bulls during that time of year. They're in velvet, they're in the higher country where bugs aren't affecting their antlers and just better feed. They're usually away from the cows. The cows had their calves down a little bit lower, the bulls are up higher, and that's where they spend the summer. Then about 2 weeks ago or so, 10th to 15th of August, the bulls start breaking out of their bachelor groups, and the big, more mature bulls are the first ones to break away. You might still find some little raghorns hanging out together this week during the first week of
Yeah.
September, but those bigger bulls move off by themselves. They're starting to feel it. Testosterone's starting to build, and they don't want company. They're getting irritable. Another bull around them just makes them want to fight, and so they move off by themselves into what I call staging areas or bull bedrooms. And this time of year, mid-August into first week of September, that's where they're hanging out. They haven't really gone necessarily to find the herds yet, but they're close to the herds. And in these bull bedrooms, they're rubbing their antlers multiple times a day. And that's how they get the velvet off. It's also how they strengthen their neck muscles to get ready for the rut. So when you get into these areas, you're going to notice there are 30 or 40 rubs within sight. Just all these
Yeah.
trees are rubbed. And you might think, oh, this is a great rutting area. But typically, when you see that many rubs together, that's their staging area, their bull bedroom. And they end up leaving that about the end of the first week into the second week of September. So, first week of September, you're probably going to be hunting some of these more mature bulls before they've got their herds established, which is a good thing. It's
Yeah.
less cows pulling them, less cows to contend with eyes and ears. So we've got less hunting pressure. The elk haven't been pressured as much. We've got these more mature bulls that are kind of staged off by themselves, and they're really irritable, and they're in a very special place to them. They're bull bedrooms, so they're very
Yeah.
territorial of this, and they don't want company. So it can create some opportunity to stir up the hornet's nest a little bit during that first week.
Hmm. So in this bull bedroom, if you say you glass one and he just goes to bed in his bedroom, uh, would your normal approach be cow calling, bugling, or would you do you have a standard approach to that?
Yeah, and so this leads into that next phase or the next just thing that we're dealt with. It's, early season. So the elk aren't rutting yet, but they're starting to think about the rut. And with them being territorial, they're starting to vocalize a little bit more. They've separated from the bachelor group, so the bulls will be locate bugling a little bit more, just keeping tabs on each other, just announcing their presence in the area. And so for me, I think my primary philosophy when it comes to calling is be aggressive, but I always start less aggressive, because once you open the can, once you pull the lid off of the aggression, you can't put it back in the can. So I always start less aggressive, because then I can escalate if I need to. So I'm going to start with cow calls if I see a bull and I know where he's going. But a lot of times we don't have that benefit. So we're covering a lot of country, and I know that we are going by a lot of elk that just aren't answering us yet. They just aren't
Okay.
vocal yet. So my philosophy is find an elk that is vocal. Because if I can find an elk that's vocal, A, I know there's an elk there.
Hmm.
B, he's vocal. So that means if I get in close and do try to coax him in with cow calls or pull the aggressive card and really push his buttons, he's vocal. So he's going to play. He's going to communicate, and he's going to take the bait. So I want to find a vocal bull during this week, and you got to cover a lot more country to find that vocal bull. But I've always had really good luck early, because they aren't pressured, and because they are starting to communicate and be vocal. So we can find them. Just understand it's not going to be, you aren't going to let out a bugle and the whole hillside's probably not going to erupt with 7 different bulls bugling. You might have to cover 4 or 5 miles and hit a lot of pockets with elk in it to find one that will answer you.
Okay. It's kind of like fishing. Keep going until you find the ones that
Exactly.
are willing to bite. You might see them
Totally.
on your electronics, but not all of them want to bite.
Yep. There's always a
Hmm.
fish somewhere that's hungry.
Yeah.
And it's the same with elk. There's always an elk somewhere that just that day he woke up and said, you know what? I feel like fighting today. And whatever it is, he laid down on a hornet's nest, he laid on a stick, he slept on his shoulder wrong, but he wakes up and he is just, today is the day that he's had enough. And a
Yeah.
lot of elk don't feel that the first week, but there's always one somewhere that does. So from there,
Yeah.
if I see an elk go into his bed, if I get a location bugle from an elk, I know where he's at, because they aren't moving too much during this time of year. Towards the end of
Hmm.
the week, they're going to start roaming a little bit, but I think the first through the fifth, we can kind of count on most of these bulls being solo and being less aggressive and not moving very far. So they're finding
Yeah.
feed and water really close to where they're safe in that bedding area. So during that time, if you come to a spot and there are 15 or 20 trees that are rubbed with fresh, bark laying on the ground, that bull's right there somewhere. And
Yeah.
that's when you can start utilizing the calls. So when you ask, do I use cow calls? Do I use bugles? I'm going to start with cow calls. And I'm going to
Okay.
listen, because a lot of times these bulls, you get 200, 300 yards from where they're bedded, you give them a couple of cow calls and they're like, it's not quite time, but there's a cow close by. I'm going to go check it out. So a lot of times they'll just come in quiet and you'll just hear a branch break as they come slipping in on the downwind side or on the uphill side where they can get a visual advantage above you. So making sure you're in a good setup where you can see downwind and kind of make sure that you've got shooting lanes above you if they do come in there. That's going to be
Mm.
important.
Okay.
Start with cow calls and listen. If they answer the cow calls, now you know they're interested in the cow. They're at least willing to communicate with the cow. So that's helpful. That's a little piece of information that, hey, I gave 2 cow calls and he immediately answered. We've got an opportunity here. If he's coming into the cow calls and talking, your job's easy. You know he's coming in. He's probably coming in more timid, not coming plowing down the hill. So he's probably going to circle downwind. He's going to try to make sure he's protected from danger. If he answers a couple times to the cow calls, but still is staying in his bed, which is probably most likely what's going to happen, I'm going to get to a perfect setup inside 150 or 200 yards if I can. And that doesn't always exist, depends on the terrain, all of that. But you want to make sure that you're capitalizing on a good setup. Don't set up in a spot where you don't have shooting lanes. Don't set up in a spot where he's going to get to 100 yards and see, across the meadow and not see an elk and not come any closer. But if you can get him to come inside 40 yards of the shooter before he can see where the calls are coming from, and on the downhill side, downwind side, there's a really good chance that the shooter's going to get a shot. And again, that bull's probably not going to get up out of his bed and come walking right into the setup. He's probably going to bugle 2 or 3 times and try to get that cow to come to him. And
Hmm.
that's when I pull the lid off the can and let the aggression out. And that it's my favorite. In early season, we have had some screaming matches with bulls that will rival anything during the peak of the rut, because now we've got in there, we've kind of worked them up that, hey, I remember who I am now. I'm the best bull on the mountain, and all these cows are interested in me. And look at this one; she wandered within 300 yards of me, probably looking for me because I'm such a big deal here on the mountain. And he's trying to convince her confidence. Oh, she's playing hard to get. It's not quite time yet. And then all of a sudden, his buddy, who he spent the summer with, who they can't stand each other now, screams at him from 300 yards away and says, "I've already claimed her." He can't handle the challenge. They're
Hmm.
wired to come undone when they're challenged at close distance. That's just how they establish their dominance. That's how they establish their harems. That's just how they're wired. So he's got that going against him. Secondly, he hasn't smelled humans over and over and over again. So he's not going to be quite as wary coming in. And then the last part of that is he's in a place where he feels safe. And he's in a place where he doesn't want company, especially another bull. And he's feeling like he's a dominant bull. So there's a good chance that if you're in close to that bull and you do get aggressive, he's going to come in to run you off. And he's been rubbing his neck or his antlers, strengthening his neck. he's ready to use the antlers by this time, and that's how they establish who the big bull is. So, we're talking being aggressive, and you're probably thinking, well, that'll work on big bulls, but I'm hunting an area where there's a lot of immature bulls or different things. But again, going back to how they're wired, those young bulls will still come in looking to fight, or at least thinking they have a chance. And in that case, they haven't been ran off by other bulls for the past 3 weeks. This is their first chance to kind of prove themselves, and they might feel a little bit tougher than they really are during this first week.